Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Katherine M. Porter channel. As you can see, I have a very special guest with me today, well known to Porter fans. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she's published, I think, 6 books on Katherine M. Porter and written numerous articles. And I believe she also edited the Library of America collected writings of Porter and also wrote a biography entitled Katherine M. Porter, The Life of an Artist. She probably knows more about Katherine M. Porter than any living person and has probably done more to preserve her legacy than any person living or dead. I don't want to embarrass her with a lengthy introduction, so I'll just say welcome, Darlene Harbour Unrue. How are you? I wanted to start out, I guess, with the obvious question. The first story of Katherine Ann Porter's that I ever read was The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, and it was for a high school class. I think it was the Prentice Hall American Literature textbook, if I remember that right. And I was so taken with it that I checked out Flowering Judas and other stories from the high school library. And then from then on, I was hooked. I think I went to college libraries, public libraries, checked out collected stories, Ship of Fools, collected essays, her letters, the Givner biography, everything I could get my hands on. And I became a lifelong fan after that. So I wanted to ask you, what was the first Katherine Ann Porter story that you read? How old were you? Do you remember the impact that it had on you?
Well,
And what it,
it was the summer between my graduation from high school and my enrolling in Marshall University.
mhm.
And I I decided I'd get a jump on some of the required courses, and I took they didn't call it freshman English, but that's what it was.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the professor was a writer himself, and he had it was a fairly big class because there were a lot of Korean War veterans in the class who were there on the GI Bill because the
Mhm.
Korean War had just ended. And so he assigned each one of us a different story, and they weren't all by Katherine Ann Porter, but they were all women. So there was something by Eudora Welty and Carson McCullers and Flannery O'Connor and Katherine Ann Porter. And so he gave me, and there was no choice. He just handed the stories out. They were all short stories, and so he gave me Flower and Judas. I could follow the plot pretty well, but I knew there were depths to that story that I just did not know. I wasn't prepared for that, but it whetted my appetite to find out more about Katherine Ann Porter. So I started reading uh, others of her short stories. Of course, this was before Ship of Fools was published, and then she came to my college. She was on a tour of college campuses, and she read The Jilting of Granny Weatherall. I didn't meet her on that occasion, but I was fascinated by her, and she impressed me with her. She's very dramatic, and she loved to play to an audience. Um, and everybody was just really enraptured by her. So that was my first encounter with Katherine Ann Porter. And so I was a psychology major, and so I didn't read much more. I read a few more of her stories, but I just proceeded with my education. And uh, by the time I finished the psychology major, I knew I didn't want to do that any longer. The rats in the maze kind of took care of that, and so I switched to an English major, and then I stayed at Marshall and took a master's degree, and and that was in English. And my master's thesis was on Ben Jonson, so you can see I was a long way away from Katherine Ann Porter. It took me a
Right.
while to get there. So when I went on to graduate school at Ohio State, uh, I was very much interested in her, and I was writing my dissertation on Henry James, and I thought that I saw a similarity in their styles.
Mhm.
And of course, she later said that James was her master,
Yes.
and she considered herself one of the James-minded people
Hmm.
instead of the Whitman-minded people.
Right.
So I had that connection that I started with, and one thing led to another. I eventually met her in Brownwood when she had returned to uh, her birthplace, and so one thing led to another, and so it was a process, and it just seemed as though I couldn't stop.
Sure. Sure.
Then she became my focus, and I just couldn't read enough or fast enough.
Hmm.
Uh, but the die was cast. Well, people who sat in her class. She did some teaching, and sometimes she went to various schools, and she loved the interaction with the students. But they were fascinated by her voice, by the poetic quality of her writing, which translated very nicely when she was performing. So I after I, finished my doctorate and had my first job at the University of Nevada, um, um, I just kept on working on Katherine Ann Porter. I wrote articles, went to conferences, and although I dabbled with some other writers for, I wrote a couple of articles on Poe and Faulkner, but Katherine Ann Porter was going to be my focus, and I knew it.
Hmm. So the second question that I gave you, number two, just can you talk a little bit about how Porter's been characterized in recent years in a negative way? And there were some articles written a few years back about her being, an FBI informant and things like that. So is all of that true? Is all that fair? Is it fair to call her? Some people have called her a pathological liar. Some people have called her a racist or an FBI informant. So can you tell us how fair those characterizations are? And is it true that she actually was an FBI informant?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And going back to one of your earlier questions about what I why I started writing a biography, different people asked me to because they thought that the current available biographies didn't capture the woman they knew.
Hmm.
And so Paul Porter, Katherine Ann Porter's nephew, had urged me to write a biography of her. So did Eudore Welty.
Mm.
Writers that she had helped,
Hmm.
Eudore Welty, Tilly Olson in
Yes.
particular. So Sam Lawrence, her editor who had shepherded Ship of Fools to
Hmm.
publication,
Hmm.
he asked me if I would write a biography. And I said, well, I'm thinking about it. And then at UNLV, we had guest speakers frequently, and especially in the English department. And Cleonth Brooks came to that campus and gave a talk. And over dinner, he asked me what I was working on. And I said, well, I'm doing a textual study of Ship of Fools. And it's, it's a big project, but I'm enjoying it. He said, I think you should lay that aside. And I think you and your husband should come to New Haven and spend several days with me and read through all of my correspondence with Katherine Ann Porter. So we did, it was a bad time to take a trip. It was final exams, and I had a house full of company, but we did go. And Cleance shared all of his letters that Catherine Ann Porter had written to him and his wife, Tinkham. Uh, so from there, it just sort of unrolled, and Eudora Welty invited me to come and visit her and have tea with her, and she also urged me to get moving, and Sita Srinivasan, who was the a director of the University Press of Mississippi. She she was eager to have the biography, so she was constantly nudging me. Have you started on it? How far along are you? And of course, it was published by them. So it was a pleasure. I tried to. I think one of your questions, Ellen, had to do with what what did I consider some of the gaps in Givner's biography that
Yes.
needed to be filled. Uh, well, it wasn't so much gaps that I saw in it, except that her biography was published in 82, and mine wasn't published until 2005.
Mhm.
And so I had a lot of time to just really interview more people, find more of her friends, ask questions. Um, I had more time to just keep digging,
Mhm.
and that's what I did.
What did you uncover in your research of Porter that was missing in Joan Givner's?
I found some extra husbands. We knew about John Henry Kuntz, and Givner had done a great deal of research into that marriage, as bad as it was. And but I found two other marriages in Texas, short marriages, but still marriages. And and so it keeps filling,
Mhm.
uh, more husbands. And I just went to interview as many people as I could and ask what they could contribute to the portrait of Catherine Ann Porter, and so that was rewarding. And Catherine Ann's nephew Paul was really valuable to me. He talked. They were very close. He talked to her all the time on the telephone, and he recorded their conversations, and he gave me those tapes.
Mhm.
So he was we were constantly in touch, and he was answering all kinds of questions. But the uh, the FBI,
Yes.
yeah, the FBI. Well, they were interested in Catherine Ann Porter. She was in Reno divorcing her last husband, Albert Erskine, and doing the 6 weeks residency. And on her birthday, uh, a young, apparently good looking FBI agent called on her and wanted to talk to her. Now she was of interest to them too, because she had participated in a women's rights rally, I guess you would call it, in New York, and so they were interested in the people who were doing that, and that wanted to talk to her about that. Wanted to talk to her about Josephine Herbst, and uh, and then also there were several other persons that had caught the attention of the FBI, and so she was kind of the hub, and so they wanted to ask her about all kinds of things. But some of these people, such as Herbst, had applied to a federal office to help with the war work, and so the background was really meticulous and intense. And so they wanted to know all they could find out about her. She and Catherine Ann had a on again, off again friendship. And they had a disagreement over Gertrude Stein, and they didn't agree on everything. And so it's quite possible if this young, good-looking FBI agent had taken her out to dinner on her birthday, she might have just opened up and said all kinds of things. She might have said, as it's been reported, that Josephine Herbst had a terrible temper.
Mhm.
So there's no question that it happened, but it wasn't that she sought out the FBI in
Right,
order to
right.
tell on her friends, and there were others, and actually, uh, uh, Eugene Presley, who was husband number four, he was of interest to the federal government too, and
Mhm.
she was no doubt asked about him also. So there's truth in that. People said she told lies, and Paul, her nephew, said, "Of course she did, but she told lies, or sometimes it was a lie by omission, uh, about things that she was embarrassed by.
Sure.
She lied about her age. She shaved some years off, and depending on who she's talking to, um, and there were some things she just kept quiet that were embarrassing to her, and she didn't tell them."
Okay. What explains Porter's fascination with Mexico? And, she called it her much loved second country. And how did Mexican culture influence her writing? And is it true she played like a minor role in Mexican politics and even in a revolution? Is that true?
Well, she lived very close to Mexico, just kind of across the border, and she went to Mexico with her father, and and so in and out. And then she met some of the Mexican artists in New York in the 20s when she was there. And she wanted to go to Paris. She wanted to go where the expatriate writers were. And they said to her, you don't want to go to Europe. Go to Mexico. That's where exciting things are
Mhm.
going on. There's a revolution going on, and there's an artistic revolution. So she did. And it was a while longer before she got to France, but she spent a lot of time in Mexico. There were multiple trips throughout the 20s, and it was I think it was very important in terms of material that she was there for the taking. That she wrote a lot of stories that were set in Mexico, and she knew that there was always this gossip about how involved she was with the Mexican leaders. And she was involved with them. There were a couple of love affairs in there, but she was very much interested in everything that was going on, and knew Diego Rivera and others, and knew some of the leaders of the government, and she was sought after. She was beautiful and interesting, and she was always welcome at parties. And
Mhm. Ship of Fools. Well, actually, I always think of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. It was a critical and a commercial failure when it was published, and now it's considered one of the greatest American novels. With Ship of Fools, it was kind of the reverse. There was great commercial success in the beginning, great critical success, and now it's largely considered a failure as a novel. And do you think the current critical estimate of the novel is fair? And what would you say are the strengths and weaknesses of the novel? And do you think maybe you could enjoy a renaissance one day?
I think that there what the um, people were trying to figure out what it was. What do you call it? There was a lot of discussion in literary circles. Is it an allegory? Is it what is it? And she said, it's an allegory if you want to call it that, but uh, it had a theme, and the theme was, she said, uh, the ship of this life on our this is our life. This is the ship going to home. The characters thought they were going home, and what they were going to was the near collapse of modern civilization. And so there's a lot of irony. She was very much a part of the Pound and Eliot school about Pound's injunction, make it new. And so she thought that she was rewriting the old Ship of Fools, Snare Ship. But she was upset that people didn't understand everything that was in there. And she pointed out to somebody once who was chiding her over writing such a dark portrait of human beings. And she said that it was that they had missed something, because it's also very much about love. That is a major theme in the novel, and it must not be overlooked.
I've always thought A Ship of Fools really is not a novel. It's really more of a collection of short stories, some of which could stand on their own. Do you think if she constructed it the same way that Faulkner did, Go Down Moses, as a collection of short stories that are sort of connected, but each one could stand on their own, would it have been more successful and more her style to do that?
The thing that binds them is that they're on that ship.
Right.
And of course there's interaction among them, but I think that there is an overall symbol, and there is allegory, and there's irony. There's great irony, and and I think it all fits together if we think of it in those terms. But Winesburg, Ohio is considered a novel, and we might see the same kind of disjointing there as we see in Ship of Fools. But she wanted people to know that there was an implied standard for each of these characters. What are they being measured against? What is the captain being measured against? And Dr. Schumann, who's one of the good persons in there. There are a lot of major themes that tie the characters together.
Do you think it's fair that some people have called Ship of Fools an anti-Semitic novel because the depiction of Herr Lowenthal, but frankly, if you know all the characters in the book, like Hansen, Herr Reber, William Denny, Herr Lowenthal looks pretty good compared to those. So there's a lot of negative portrayals in the book, not just of Herr Lowenthal. So do you think that's fair to call it an anti-Semitic novel, as some have called it?
Well, that's a good question, but it's a hard question to answer. I think the characters sometimes are played off of each other, that they're in contrast to some of their fellow passengers, and it's humanity that are represented in all kinds of forms, and they're not all flattering, and some are downright unflattering. Sometimes she uses their names, gives them names that evoke some kind of standard. Maybe it's a painter or a musician. So there's that standard that is hovering behind these characters so that they can be measured. This is where they're lacking. This is where they're failing. So a lot of irony and a lot of allegory.
I guess one of the criticisms of Porter you hear more than others is that she didn't write enough. But if you actually were to collect all of her writings in one volume, she wrote, about 500 pages of short stories, 500 pages of essays, about a 500-page novel, ton of letters, ton of book reviews, as you know, because you collected some of these things. If you put it all in one volume, it might fill 2 or 3 thousand pages. So she wrote a lot, but why didn't she write more fiction? And was she too severe a critic of herself, or were there circumstances in her life or
She,
person? Go
she
ahead.
wasn't very well organized, Alan.
Okay.
And she always had money problems. She was terrible managing money. So she would take, uh, appointments at universities or take jobs, doing some journalistic work, writing those fairy tales, those retold fairy tales, because
Mhm.
she needed money. So she just wasn't very well organized, didn't manage money well, and so she didn't work in a very methodical way. And she always had contracts that weren't completed. She was always trying to juggle contracts, and she would be getting advances, especially from Harcourt Brace, and uh, and she would feel guilty, and she couldn't do anything else till she got this done. And of course, many things she did not finish.
Mhm. So maybe there were too many distractions, too many love affairs, maybe, and um, just too many maybe circumstances that kept her from writing more. Did she have any personality traits? Did she have like a short attention span? Did she have certain traits that might have kept her from focusing on writing more? Or,
She just, she spent so much money when A Ship of Fools was published
mhm,
that Sam Lawrence had to put her on a budget
mhm.
and not give her all of her royalties because she would have gone right through.
And it's true. I
Uh,
know she bought that famous emerald, the famous emerald
oh
ring
yes,
that
oh
she
yes,
showed to everybody, but it
it
wasn't
was.
quite the emerald that she thought it was. Is that right?
It was, I forget how many carats it was, but it
Yeah.
was a big one and it had some diamonds on the side. But Paul, her nephew, said that he had it appraised once and she didn't get the value of the ring. She paid too much for it.
Right, right.
It's her birthstone. She'd always wanted an emerald ring. She liked pearls too.
Mhm. Just to set the record straight, what is Catherine Ann Porter's real name? I think there are a lot of names in there, a lot of middle names, and why did she change her name to Catherine Ann Porter?
Oh, well, that's a pretty easy one. She changed her name when she divorced John Kuntz, and she took and so she took her grandmother's name, her paternal grandmother, except different spelling, and so uh, she was her childhood name was Callie. That was and so she liked to pretend that it really was Callista, but it
Mhm,
wasn't.
mhm. Right.
And I found the family that Callie Joe was a part of, and so they were neighbors. They had and there's some thought that probably Callie Joe stayed with Catherine Ann some, and that she helped her, with, I don't know, maybe light housekeeping or something like that. But she took that a version of her name uh, for her own name, and so yeah, she didn't want people to know that it had humble beginnings.
Mhm. I was wondering, when you were writing your biography of Porter, did
Mhm.
you have access to like radio broadcasts that she did, say in the 50s or 60s, or recordings or readings? Do any of those things still survive? It seems like very little of it is available for the rest of us to hear if it's still even survived. But
Yes. It was, it became a, labor of love.
mhm,
Once I got into it, I wanted to finish it, and I had enough people, see the Srinivasan and Sam Lawrence and others were constantly saying, how far along are you? When's it
mhm,
going to be finished? but I was committed to it. So I didn't need much pushing.
Mhm. Well, let's go to the last question I gave you, probably the most important question. What would you say, what is your final assessment of Porter's legacy? And how great was she? Do you think her work has stood the test of time? And what did she contribute to American literature that no one else did? That's the last question I gave.
Well, I think that our best writers have a distinctive style for each, so there's always that. And I think that she did. I mean, she didn't write like anybody else exactly. And she had an elegance in her diction, not just her spoken language, but in writing. She got so tired of hearing people say that she was a brilliant stylist, and they would act
Mhm.
as though that was enough.
Mhm.
And she didn't like that. She had a falling out with Sam Lawrence because when he wrote the catalog copy before Ship of Fools actually was out, he said that she was one of the most significant women writers. And she just, those letters that she wrote him as a result of that are priceless.
Mhm. Mhm.
She said, don't put me in the second rank. If you think I'm good, just, let me be compared with Henry James and Ernest Hemingway don't put me in the second class. She said, I'm not ashamed of the women writers. I think that nobody's ever been better uh, than Emily Bronte. And
Mhm.
so she was and Virginia Woolf, she admired greatly, but she didn't want to be demeaned by saying she's the best woman writer.
Right, right. Speaking of Hemingway, you brought up Ernest Hemingway. Can you describe the encounter between Porter and Hemingway and how did that go?
Yeah, that was in Sylvia Beach's bookshop in Paris. And so Sylvia had, and Sylvia liked both of them, but she said, I think she said, I, I don't remember whether she introduced one of them to the others or not, but she said, here are the two best American writers that we have today. And according to Catherine Ann's account of the encounter, Hemingway kind of glared at her and turned around
Mhm.
and walked out of the
Wow.
shop. He thought it was beneath him to be compared to her.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. I was very flattered that you accepted my invitation, since you didn't really know me from Adam in the beginning. So it's just been a great honor and a great privilege to interview you. And I'd love to do this again sometime if I can think of some more questions. Um, but thank you so much, and we'll stay in touch. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again. I hope I see you at the Catherine Ann Porter session,
You
and
might. You might.
and it's in Boston next
Yes.
May.
I'm an official member of the Catherine Ann Porter Society now, so I probably should
Are
go
you?
to
Oh, good. Well,
I probably
that's
should go
great.
to one of the conferences. So it's
Well,
on my
that's great.
list.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll be in touch, and
Yes,
and I'll be following the Catherine Ann Porter channel. And
I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your support of me and of my channel. You take care.